Another thing that's typical about autism is having these like mysterious, inexplicable conditions that are chronic. Like I have some chronic pains. I have chronic sinus problems. Actually, I just emailed you yesterday and I said like, hey man, I think I might be getting sick with one of my chronic things. Turns out, no, I was totally fine today. But I do have those ongoing, like mysterious, difficult problems. And without any exception, anytime I go to a physician and I'm like, yo, I have these chronic sinus problems, for example, that, flare up and they just totally destroy my day for 2 or 3 days straight. And I don't know where they're coming from. I've done all sorts of experimenting. Is it this? Is it this? Is it this? What if I isolate that variable? And I can't figure it out. So I go to a doctor. I'm like, yo, this is your professed expertise, is it not? And they say, yeah, I'll help. And then they look for 5 seconds and they say, I don't know. And they give up and they kick me out of their office.
Ugh.
And that's just one particular issue. I have other issues as well like that. And generally speaking, I don't know if it's like too much work and not enough time kind of thing. So the physician like literally just doesn't have the available time in his or her day to really focus and dig into the nuance of my situation. And they're just like, I don't know, it's not in my diagnostic book. Bye.
Yeah, it's not in the paragraph here. Yeah.
It's easy to have compassionate understanding for them, while at the same time, I'm still not getting helped. And certainly going beyond physical physicians, like a bodily physician, going into the realm of psychotherapists, that's like, I have -% trust in them. They are not, when it comes to autism in particular, they are the opposite of competent. Like they do damage and it's not okay. So that's part of why I mentioned to you that I tend to take almost an activist style approach to these topics of mental health and autism, because there's a serious problem where people really don't understand it. And frankly, it's not a mystery. It's not that hard to understand as long as you just don't, do the same thing everyone else has always done.
Why do you think that too? Do you think there's some truths that a lot of people don't want to admit, or are a lot of us clinging to what we grew up with, or our not schism, but our perspective of what we think is the world, and it's scary to start to really get. What do you think causes that lack of wanting to really explore autism, you think?
Autism specifically, I would say,
or in general,
it's part of what autism is. If you read into any autistic literature, you'll hear terms like neurotype, where people talk about how the way that your brain is wired has a determining impact upon how you interpret things.
Yeah.
And so in terms of like why specific autism, why there's such a dearth of understanding, I suspect, I'm guessing here, that it's partly because we don't have any kind of, or we're only at the very beginning of creating a framework for interpreting it. So we've inherited all of these like clumsy lenses, all of these clumsy contextualization frameworks for interpreting unexpected behavior. That's in some sense the summary of what autism is. It's unexpected social behavior. Oh, it's unexpected, rewind 200 years. You're a witch. You're the reason my crops got burned.
Right? Yeah, exactly. I mean, that you could argue that a lot of the witch trials were the lack of understanding of neurodivergence, in general. It's the girl's barking like a dog. Well, maybe that's not possession, or a frog in her head or something, whatever they decided. And that's interesting. You mentioned something too about like, we're just now kind of learning that it's behavior that's not normal, quote unquote normal. And so they're just like, it's like, instead of really kind of like what is normal, defining what normal is could be a kind of a problem. Autism, my understanding, autism can be a spectrum, right? It's not just like you have autism, you're this person, right? And do you think that like sometimes people want to put like autism as this one diagnosable box, and it's like this?
Absolutely. Yeah. So you often, if you again look into modern autistic dialogue, you'll hear people say things like, If you've met one autistic person, you've met one autistic person, as opposed to you met them all, kind of thing.
Yeah.
And you're right that the whole idea of an autistic spectrum, it's not even clear that there's only one thing called autism. There might be different, flavors and variations that, again, we don't have the framework for interpreting it.
Yeah.
But when people talk about a spectrum, usually there are one of two things they might mean. One thing they might mean is the so-called intensity or severity levels, where people talk about like, oh, you might be a high functioning autistic person versus like very serious day-to-day high needs for support.
Mm-hmm.
And it's true. Like in my experience, that does exist. I speak with a number of other autistic people. Like that absolutely is true. There is an intensity element to it. But usually when people talk about the autistic spectrum, what they're really talking about is there are all these different qualities, and any given autistic person may or may not have any of those qualities to any given magnitude. For example, a very common autistic quality is difficulty making eye contact or sustained eye contact.
Yeah.
And you might have one autistic person who is like, cannot look you in the eye for 1 second at all, ever, under any circumstances. And you might have another person who is kind of okay, maybe briefly glances away a little bit, but is more or less okay in terms of eye contact. So you might look at that and be like, oh, well, only the one who's very exaggerated, like, Rain Man in the movie, that's real autism. But this other one, no, you're just being a jerk. It's like, whoa, no. So
it's like a sliding scale. It could be a sliding scale. It's not necessarily, Rain Man is the example, which that's interesting you brought that up, because the first time I ever really heard of autism was from that movie. And so I immediately just said, put it in a box and said, okay, if you're Rain Man, that's autism. And then when later on, when people would describe somebody, oh, this person has autism, and they're nothing like that. Right. And they're like they're just to me, a quirky person. And quirky by my definition is just someone a little bit different than me. And all of a sudden I'm like, well, wait a second. They're not Rain Man. How are they autistic? And I feel like sometimes, do you see this a lot, where the term autism, sometimes people feel it's used a lot very loosely, and like just to describe anybody that's different. And do you think sometimes there might be some either parents or people that try to say they're autistic just to kind of describe being quirky? And does that muddy the waters a little bit and make people like not quite understand the difference between someone that's like a high functioning and autistic versus someone that's just making an excuse for their weird behavior? Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, I see what you mean. In the circles I run in, I don't often hear people saying that sort of thing, but I am familiar with the idea that someone be like, "Oh, I'm a little autistic."
Yeah.
Like, whoa. No. It's not a matter of degree. You either are or not. Mm-hmm. And the essential essence, like the way that you can spot an autistic person is, how do I phrase this? It's not changing their social approach based on the situation they're in. So always acting the same with everybody, and not being able to build relationships, not understanding why that person didn't respond well to that thing I said. That's the core essential element of what comprises what we call autism.
I get Catch new episodes of Mental Health Mondays every Monday morning at 7 a.m. Start your week off with a smile and some inspiration.